dangerous parts of the book, is that the... That's a good sound. Yeah. Eulalia, the narrator, talks about his daughter's new home in a penthouse apartment as Palestra himself. For him, that's exactly what it is, because he's from the days when everything was, chalets and everything was ground level. And, now he's surrounded by high-rises, and he doesn't have the words for that as well. He refers to it as Palestra himself. And, there's no way around it. It has to be the palace in the sky. I didn't see any reason why I would give it a different translation. That is the leap that the author expects the readers to make, and it's exactly the same leap in English and Portuguese. So I left it as it was, and I'm heading coming back to me saying, can't we just say penthouse? I said, no, you can't say penthouse, because that's not the way they think. And so, you really sort of have to be an advocate for the writer and for what they're doing, and I think that's really important. But on the other hand, I'm quite happy for an editor to come to me and say, what if we just convert this phrase? I think it will sort of fit together with the rest of it better, or we don't. This particular sentence here sounds a little bit American. If we could just change these words, and I trust them. They're people like ground zero, in the United States or in the UK, or sometimes even in Australia. Although in Australia, I love to work with Australians because I don't have to think about these things. And so there's this element of trust, but also I've had the commissioning editor make all kinds of suggested changes, and I say, well, okay, he's British. If he thinks that sounds better to British here, that's fine. I'm happy to change. It feels like, half a dozen. But I said, fine, if he thinks that sounds better, I'll do it. And then I'll have the editor come back and change everything that he suggested, change back to the way it was for me. So, this sort of element of trust is kind of, I'm trusting you to do your little bit there to adapt it, but also sometimes it's really just personal preference. And it's really hard to negotiate these waters. And also make sure that you don't get something that sounds like it's a patchwork of different voices in there at the same time. So you've got to maintain the integrity of the voice, even if that has to, in the end, be my voice in English, filtering all of these things through. The book is published. It doesn't stop there. Usually, it's getting harder and harder to market books these days, and a lot of what is done online, and it's really hard for books to get reviewed. If a book doesn't get reviews, it doesn't sell, usually. And sometimes the book does very well, or it gets a prize, or gets nominated for a prize, or for some reason it just seems to appeal to reviewers, and they review it, and it sells. And other books just, other really wonderful books, just for some reason, sometimes you have the editor in the publishing house move to another publishing house, and somebody steps into their shoes and takes over the things that they were working on. And those things, they're not their pet projects that they were with from day one. And so they, do their best with them, but it may be not the same as if the original editor had run with it all the way through. So I think maybe sometimes the marketing of these books falls down a little bit there. Maybe not, these are just theories. But the translator is often called upon to, give interviews or do Q&As for websites and things, and I feel duty-bound to do them because they're just another way of getting the word out there about books. And then, they put it in Facebook and they put it wherever, Twitter or whatever. I don't understand anything about Twitter. But, they do what they do with it. And the translator doesn't pay for any of this, but it's a way of helping the life of the book in some way. And so, so it can be quite a long journey in terms of the support that you give to a book all the way through. I thought I'd give you just a few examples of some of the books I've worked on to tell you the backstory of the books. I don't know if you know this or not, City of God was actually sold to the British publisher around the time that it was sold to all of the publishers all over the world. And at that time the book was 600 pages long in Portuguese. And the book was translated into 14 different languages. And it was translated into English, and the publisher rejected the translation. And it was kind of, you know, fairly high-profile translator, and it was just sort of put in a drawer. Didn't do anything with it. And then the movie came, the movie came out. It was based on the first edition of the book. And a lot of people started coming forward and saying, you used my nickname. And there were a lot of lawsuits aimed at Paulo and Company of those letters because of that. And so he edited the book, and he decided to edit it down from 600 to 400 pages. And so a lot of characters were taken out, and all of the nicknames were changed. And then it was nominated for an Oscar. It ran 2 years. I forget the reasons why it was allowed to run twice, but anyway, it ran once and then it ran again. And the publishers scrabbled suddenly to get a translation done. And actually there was another translation in the middle that somebody was commissioned to do the translation, started it and then washed their hands and said, right, this is madness, take it away from me. And so it sat in a drawer for a bit longer. And then I was finally asked to do it. And I was a lot younger and new in the business and thought, yes, I'll do anything. So bring it on. And so I did the translation, and that is why it came out 10 years later than the actual, I think it was published in 2006, and the actual book was published in Brazil in 96 or 97. But a lot of people, it's funny because I've heard a lot of theories about why that happened, and that's the real story. Bruna Sofistinha, I translated. Same publisher that did Budapest, City of God, and Bruna Sofistinha. Yeah, and I thought, you know, it was doing really well in Brazil at the time, and I thought, you know, what the hell, I'll ask for royalties, and you know, maybe you'll get some money out of this business, you know. But unfortunately, and this is when I first realised that the fact of somebody being famous and selling a lot of books in one country doesn't mean that they're going to sell a lot in another country, because the book itself has to stand up on its own out there. It doesn't have the famous person behind it, and quite often they just fall flat on their faces. It didn't have the platform. And even if, you know, that had sort of sparked people's interest in pornography and they wanted to go access her site or her blog, they couldn't have read it because it was all in Portuguese. So, you know, just sort of, I still get royalty statements from that book, and it's like sold 14 copies or something. It's didn't sell, basically. I'm not sure how the Americans, if it sold, because they did a different contract. It's my translation, but I didn't get royalties for that. Didn't for the other one. Then, O Filho Eterno by Cristóbal Pesa was one where I actually approached the publisher, an Australian publisher, which I love, and you know, showed him the book and said, "Do you think you're interested in it?" And he said, "Yes, let's do it." And so I translated that, and that was one where I really ran into a lot of difficulties. Really felt like a pig in the middle between the author and the publisher, because I think the publisher just didn't get the book in the end. The sample chapter that he'd seen appealed to his taste in literature, but it's really quite different to the rest of the book. Chapter 4 can stand on its own by itself, whereas all the rest is really quite different. And chapter 4 had been done because I had done it as a standalone piece sometime earlier for a magazine, for Words Without Borders, which some of you may know. It's an American magazine online that publishes literature and translations. Very good. And so anyway, I found myself, when it came to the editing process, the editor wanting to completely change everything and completely just make the writing understandable to people from an English-speaking background. I totally understood where he was coming from.